The delivery driver mocked the elderly black woman, standing at her front door without knowing she owned the entire delivery company and could end his career with a single phone call. 24-year-old Marcus Thompson stood on the front porch of the modest two-story house on Maple Street that rainy Thursday afternoon in September, holding a package addressed to Mrs. A. Williams, while sneering at the 71-year-old woman who had answered the door wearing a faded housecoat and slippers that had seen better days. To Marcus, she looked like exactly the kind of customer who would complain about delivery fees, ask endless questions about shipping procedures, and generally waste his time with requests that weren't part of his basic job responsibilities. Mrs. Adelaide Williams stood in her doorway with the patient dignity that had carried her through 7 decades of challenges and achievements, wearing the comfortable clothes she preferred for her daily routine of reading financial reports, reviewing business correspondence, and managing the investment portfolio that had made her one of the wealthiest women in the state. Her appearance was deliberately modest, reflecting both her practical nature and her conscious decision to live simply, despite having accumulated a fortune that exceeded $50 million through strategic investments and business ownership across multiple industries. The misunderstanding began when Marcus noticed that the delivery address on his tablet didn't match the expensive neighborhood where he had expected to find Mrs. Williams based on the high-value electronics package he was delivering. The house at 1247 Maple Street was well-maintained but unpretentious, located in a middle-class neighborhood that had been slowly gentrifying over the past decade as young professionals discovered the area's affordability and convenient location near downtown employment centers. Marcus had been working for QuickShip delivery services for 8 months, hired based on his clean driving record and his availability for the evening and weekend shifts that more experienced drivers typically avoided. His training had emphasized efficiency, customer interaction protocols, and package security procedures, but it had not included any guidance about treating customers with respect, regardless of their appearance or the perceived value of their neighborhoods. What Marcus didn't know was that the elderly woman he was preparing to mock and dismiss was not only the recipient of the expensive electronics package he was delivering, but also the majority owner of QuickShip Delivery Services, the company that employed him and over 2,000 other drivers across the metropolitan area. Mrs. Williams had founded the delivery company in 1995 as a subsidiary of her broader logistics and transportation business empire, building it into one of the region's most successful shipping operations through her understanding of customer service excellence and operational efficiency. The investment philosophy that had enabled Mrs. Williams to build her business empire was rooted in her grandmother's teachings about the importance of providing essential services that other people needed but couldn't easily access themselves. Born in rural Georgia in 1952, to parents who operated a small farm and general store, Adelaide had learned from childhood that successful businesses were built on understanding customer needs and delivering reliable service with integrity and respect. The transformation of young Adelaide from a farm girl helping in her family's general store to Mrs. Adelaide Williams, owner of transportation companies, real estate holdings, and technology investments worth tens of millions of dollars, had been achieved through decades of careful planning, strategic thinking, and an unwavering commitment to treating every business relationship as an opportunity to demonstrate the values that had guided her family for generations. Mrs. Williams' decision to maintain a modest lifestyle, despite her substantial wealth, reflected both her practical nature and her understanding that visible displays of affluence often attracted unwanted attention and created barriers between herself and the communities where her businesses operated. Her choice to live in a comfortable but unremarkable house, drive reliable but unostentatious vehicles, and dress in simple practical clothing allowed her to move through daily life without the complications that often accompanied obvious wealth. The delivery company that Marcus worked for had been built according to Mrs. Williams's specifications for customer service excellence, with training programs that emphasized treating every customer with respect and professionalism, regardless of their appearance, neighborhood, or the perceived value of their packages. Her approach to business management, prioritized employee development and customer satisfaction over short-term profit maximization, creating a corporate culture that had earned QuickShip delivery services recognition as one of the region's best places to work. Marcus's approach to his delivery route that Thursday afternoon had been shaped by his frustration with what he perceived as demanding customers who expected more service than his job description required. His previous stop had involved an elderly customer who had asked him to wait while she verified the contents of a fragile package, and his next scheduled delivery was to an apartment complex where he would have to navigate multiple flights of stairs to reach units whose residents often weren't home during business hours. The package that Marcus was delivering to Mrs. Williams contained a specialized computer server that she had ordered for her home office, where she conducted much of the research and analysis that guided her investment decisions and business operations. The server, worth over $8,000, was part of a technology upgrade that would allow her to access real-time financial data and communicate more efficiently with business partners around the world. Mrs. Williams' home office was located in the converted basement of her house, equipped with the same sophisticated technology and communication systems that might be found in corporate headquarters or investment firms. The modest exterior of her home provided privacy and security for business activities that involved managing hundreds of millions of dollars in assets and making decisions that affected thousands of employees across her various business ventures. Marcus's irritation with having to deliver a heavy package to what he assumed was an elderly customer who would probably need help understanding how to use expensive technology was compounded by his schedule pressure and his general attitude toward customers who didn't fit his expectations about who should be receiving high-value deliveries. His approach to customer service had been influenced by his assumption that delivery drivers shouldn't have to provide assistance beyond simply handing over packages and collecting signatures. "Ma'am, I have a delivery for A. Williams," Marcus announced when Mrs. Williams answered her door, his tone carrying the impatience and slight condescension that characterized his interactions with customers he considered problematic or demanding. "This is a pretty expensive package, so I'm going to need to see some identification and get a signature confirming that you're authorized to accept delivery." The request for identification was technically within company policy for high-value deliveries, but Marcus's tone and manner suggested that he doubted Mrs. Williams's legitimacy as the intended recipient rather than simply following standard security procedures. His assumption that an elderly black woman living in a modest house couldn't possibly be the legitimate recipient of an expensive technology package revealed both his personal prejudices and his fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth and success actually appeared in the real world. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's barely disguised suspicion was patient and accommodating, reflecting her decades of experience with people who made assumptions about her capabilities and circumstances based on her appearance or living situation. "Of course, young man," she replied, reaching for her purse to retrieve the identification that would confirm her identity as the package recipient. "I understand you need to follow proper procedures for expensive deliveries." The driver's license that Mrs. Williams presented clearly showed her name as Adelaide Catherine Williams and confirmed her address as 1247 Maple Street, providing exactly the documentation that Marcus had requested to verify her identity and authorization to receive the package. However, his examination of her identification revealed additional information that should have prompted him to reconsider his assumptions about her circumstances and status. The license showed that Mrs. Williams was 71 years old, making her part of a generation that had built substantial wealth through decades of hard work and careful investing, often in ways that weren't immediately visible to younger people who associated success primarily with conspicuous consumption and ostentatious displays of affluence. Her address confirmation should have settled any questions about her legitimacy as the package recipient, but Marcus's prejudicial assumptions prevented him from processing this information appropriately. "Well, I guess you're really A. Williams," Marcus said with obvious surprise and barely concealed skepticism, as if the idea that an elderly black woman could be the legitimate recipient of expensive technology was fundamentally unlikely. "But I have to ask, Are you sure you ordered this yourself? Because this is a pretty sophisticated computer server, and a lot of times these expensive deliveries are scams or mistakes that cause problems for everyone involved. The suggestion that Mrs. Williams might not have legitimately ordered the package she was receiving revealed Marcus's assumptions about elderly customers and their understanding of technology, as well as his belief that expensive purchases were somehow inappropriate or suspicious when made by people who didn't fit his stereotypical expectations about wealth and sophistication. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's insulting implication was shaped by 71 years of experience with people who underestimated her intelligence, capabilities, and resources based on their prejudicial assumptions about age, race, and gender. Her calm response reflected both her confidence in her own accomplishments and her understanding that moments like these often provided opportunities to educate people about the dangers of making assumptions based on superficial characteristics. "Young man, I can assure you that I ordered this server myself, and I'm quite familiar with the technology involved," Mrs. Williams replied, her voice carrying a subtle authority that Marcus was too focused on his own assumptions to recognize. "I've been working with computer systems and business technology for longer than you've been alive, and this particular server will be used for managing my business operations and investment activities." The mention of business operations and investment activities should have prompted Marcus to reconsider his assumptions about Mrs. Williams' circumstances and capabilities, but his commitment to his prejudicial worldview prevented him from processing information that contradicted his expectations about elderly customers and their likely relationship to expensive technology purchases. Marcus's response to Mrs. Williams' mention of business operations revealed both his arrogance and his complete inability to imagine that the elderly woman standing before him could be anything other than what his prejudices suggested she must be. "Look, lady, I don't know what kind of business you think you're running from this little house," he said with a smirk that made his contempt obvious, "but this server costs more than most people make in 6 months. Are you sure someone didn't use your credit card to buy something you can't afford?" The suggestion that Mrs. Williams was either the victim of credit card fraud or financially irresponsible enough to purchase technology she couldn't afford revealed the depth of Marcus's assumptions about elderly customers and his fundamental misunderstanding of how wealth actually appeared in communities he served. His mocking reference to her little house demonstrated his belief that success and sophistication could only exist in forms that he personally recognized and approved of. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's increasingly insulting behavior was informed by her memories of similar encounters throughout her business career, when younger men had routinely dismissed her ideas, questioned her competence, and assumed that her success must be the result of luck or assistance from male partners rather than her own intelligence and strategic thinking. The most painful memory that Marcus's behavior triggered was from 1978, when Mrs. Williams had attended her first major business conference as a 26-year-old entrepreneur, seeking investors for her transportation company startup. A venture capitalist who was younger than Marcus had looked at her business plan for exactly 30 seconds before pushing it back across the table and saying, "Sweetie, maybe you should start with something smaller, like a beauty salon or a catering business. Transportation is a man's industry." That moment of dismissal had taught Mrs. Williams 2 crucial lessons that shaped every subsequent business decision. First, that other people's assumptions about her capabilities were irrelevant to her actual potential for success, and second, that the most satisfying victories came from proving wrong the people who had underestimated her based on their superficial prejudices. The transportation company that the venture capitalist had dismissed as inappropriate for a young black woman had grown into Williams Logistics International, a multi-million-dollar enterprise that provided shipping and freight services for clients throughout North America and Europe. The success of her logistics business had provided the foundation for expansion into related industries, including the delivery service company that currently employed the young man who was mocking her on her own front porch. QuickShip delivery services had been founded in 1995 when Mrs. Williams recognized that the growing e-commerce industry would create demand for reliable, customer-focused delivery operations that could compete with established shipping companies through superior service and innovative technology. Her approach to building the delivery company had emphasized employee training, customer satisfaction, and operational efficiency, creating a business model that had proven both profitable and sustainable over nearly 3 decades. The irony of Marcus's employment situation was profound, but invisible to him. He was mocking and insulting the woman who had created his job, developed the training programs that were supposed to teach him professional behavior, and established the customer service standards that his conduct was violating with every word he spoke. His paycheck was signed by the company that Mrs. Williams owned. His benefits were provided through programs she had developed, and his employment security depended entirely on her continued investment in the delivery service industry. Mrs. Williams' decision to maintain direct oversight of QuickShip's operations, despite having competent management teams in place, reflected her understanding that successful businesses required constant attention to detail and personal commitment from ownership. Her quarterly reviews of employee performance, customer satisfaction data, and operational efficiency metrics allowed her to identify problems and implement improvements before they could damage the company's reputation or profitability. The customer service training program that Marcus had completed when he was hired included specific modules about treating all customers with respect, regardless of their appearance, neighborhood, or the perceived value of their deliveries. The training emphasized that delivery drivers were representatives of the company whose behavior could enhance or damage QuickShip's reputation with every customer interaction. Mrs. Williams had personally developed much of the training content based on her understanding that customer loyalty was built through consistent positive experiences rather than simply competitive pricing or convenient scheduling. Marcus's violation of virtually every principle covered in his customer service training represented exactly the kind of employee behavior that Mrs. Williams's oversight systems were designed to identify and correct. His insulting treatment of customers, his assumptions based on appearance and neighborhood characteristics, and his dismissive attitude toward people he considered unworthy of professional service violated both company policies and basic standards of human decency. The sophisticated technology systems that supported QuickShip's operations included customer feedback mechanisms, delivery tracking databases, and employee performance monitoring tools that provided Mrs. Williams with real-time information about service quality and operational efficiency. Every delivery was recorded, every customer interaction was documented, and every employee's performance was evaluated based on objective metrics and customer satisfaction surveys. Marcus's delivery route that Thursday afternoon was being monitored through GPS tracking, customer feedback systems, and quality control procedures that would document his performance and provide data for his upcoming quarterly review. His behavior toward Mrs. Williams was not occurring in isolation. It was being recorded as part of a comprehensive evaluation system that would determine his continued employment and advancement opportunities within the company. The investment portfolio that Mrs. Williams managed from her home office included holdings in technology companies, real estate developments, manufacturing operations, and service industries that generated millions of dollars in annual income and had been carefully selected based on decades of research and analysis. Her understanding of market trends, economic indicators, and business fundamentals had enabled her to build wealth that far exceeded what most people could imagine, while maintaining the modest lifestyle that reflected her personal values and practical nature. The computer server that Marcus was delivering would provide Mrs. Williams with enhanced capability for analyzing financial data, communicating with business partners, and managing investment decisions that involved hundreds of millions of dollars in assets. Her home office contained the same level of technology and information access that might be found in major investment firms or corporate headquarters, despite being located in the basement of a house that Marcus had dismissed as too modest to support serious business activities. Mrs. Williams' daily routine included reviewing market reports from Asia and Europe, analyzing performance data from her various business investments, and communicating with managers, advisors, and partners who helped coordinate operations across her business empire. Her decisions influenced employment for thousands of people, generated significant tax revenue for multiple communities, and contributed to economic development in industries ranging from transportation and logistics to technology and real estate. The modest appearance of Mrs. Williams's house and neighborhood had been carefully chosen to provide privacy, security, and freedom from the complications that often accompanied visible wealth. Her decision to live simply while managing complex business operations allowed her to focus on strategic thinking and relationship building, rather than dealing with the social expectations and security concerns that might arise from more ostentatious displays of affluence. Marcus's assumption that wealth and business sophistication could only exist in forms that he personally recognized reflected his limited experience and his narrow understanding of how successful people actually lived and worked. His belief that expensive technology purchases were inappropriate for elderly customers living in modest houses revealed both his ageism and his fundamental misunderstanding of how financial success accumulated and was maintained over decades of careful planning and strategic investment. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude," Marcus continued, though his tone made clear that being rude was exactly what he intended. "But I've delivered a lot of expensive packages, and usually they go to big houses in fancy neighborhoods or to businesses with corporate addresses. This just seems like maybe there's been some kind of mistake, and I don't want either of us to get in trouble when someone realizes that an $8,000 server was delivered to the wrong place." The false concern that Marcus expressed about getting in trouble was actually a continuation of his insulting behavior, disguised as helpfulness, but clearly intended to suggest that Mrs. Williams was somehow inappropriate as the recipient of expensive technology. His comparison of her house and neighborhood to the big houses in fancy neighborhoods, where he expected expensive deliveries to be made, revealed his superficial understanding of wealth and his assumption that success could only be legitimate when it conformed to his stereotypical expectations. Mrs. Williams's response to Marcus's continued insults was shaped by her decades of experience in building businesses and managing people who initially underestimated her capabilities. Her approach to dealing with prejudice and disrespect had evolved from the angry confrontations of her youth to the strategic patience of someone who understood that the most effective way to address ignorance was often to allow it to be fully displayed before demonstrating how wrong it could be. If this story is touching your heart, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. "Young man, I appreciate your concern about delivery accuracy," Mrs. Williams replied, her voice maintaining the calm authority that had commanded respect in boardrooms and business negotiations for decades. "But I can assure you that this delivery is correct, and that I am quite capable of affording and using the technology I've purchased. Perhaps it would be helpful if I provided you with some additional information about my background and qualifications." The offer to provide additional information about her background was Mrs. Williams' way of giving Marcus an opportunity to learn something important about assumptions, respect, and the dangers of judging people based on superficial characteristics. Her decision about how much to reveal would depend on whether he demonstrated any willingness to reconsider his prejudicial attitudes or continued to display the arrogance and disrespect that had characterized their interaction thus far. Marcus's response to Mrs. Williams' offer to provide background information revealed his complete commitment to maintaining his prejudicial assumptions and his unwillingness to consider that he might be fundamentally wrong about the woman he had been insulting for the past 10 minutes. "Look, lady, I don't need your life story," he said with exaggerated impatience, checking his phone as if to emphasize that she was wasting his valuable time. "I just need you to sign for this package so I can move on to my next delivery. And honestly, you might want to call your bank and make sure someone didn't steal your credit card information, because this purchase doesn't make any sense." The dismissive reference to her life story and the renewed suggestion of credit card theft revealed Marcus's determination to maintain his narrative that Mrs. Williams was either a victim of fraud or an elderly woman making inappropriate financial decisions. His theatrical display of impatience and his obvious desire to end their interaction demonstrated his complete inability to recognize that he was speaking to someone whose background and accomplishments far exceeded his understanding. Mrs. Williams' decision about how to respond to Marcus's escalating disrespect was informed by her decades of experience in business situations where strategic revelation of information could transform hostile encounters into educational opportunities. Her approach to dealing with people who underestimated her had evolved from confrontational responses to more sophisticated methods that allowed their own ignorance and prejudice to create the context for profound learning experiences. "Young man, before I sign for this package, I think it would be appropriate for you to understand exactly who you're speaking to and what company you represent, Mrs. Williams said, her voice taking on the authoritative tone that had commanded respect in corporate boardrooms and investment meetings for over 4 decades. She reached into her purse and withdrew a business card that would transform Marcus's understanding of both his employment situation and the catastrophic error in judgment he had been making. The business card that Mrs. Williams handed to Marcus was elegantly simple. Adelaide C. Williams, founder and chief executive officer, Williams Logistics International, with contact information for corporate headquarters and subsidiary companies. The gold embossing and high-quality cardstock reflected the professional standards of a major business enterprise, but the most important information was the company name that appeared in smaller text below the corporate logo: QuickShip Delivery Services, a Williams Logistics company. Marcus's reaction to seeing the business card was a study in cognitive dissonance and rapidly escalating panic as he processed the information that connected the elderly woman he had been mocking to the company that employed him. The woman standing before him in a faded housecoat and worn slippers was not just a customer, she was the founder and owner of QuickShip Delivery Services, the person who had created his job and who had ultimate authority over his continued employment. This can't be right," Marcus stammered, his voice betraying the confusion and growing fear that came with realizing the magnitude of his error. "You're saying you own QuickShip, but you're just... you live in this regular house and you're dressed like... This doesn't make sense." The incomplete sentences and obvious panic in Marcus's response revealed his struggle to reconcile his prejudicial assumptions about wealth and success with the reality of the person standing before him. His reference to her regular house and his inability to finish his comment about her appearance demonstrated that his worldview was colliding with facts that challenged everything he believed about how successful people should look and live. Mrs. Williams's response to Marcus's shock was patient and educational, reflecting her understanding that moments like these provided opportunities to teach important lessons about respect, assumptions, and the true nature of leadership and success. Her approach emphasized facts and evidence, rather than anger or punishment, demonstrating the same professional demeanor that had built trust with business partners and employees throughout her career. "Mr. Thompson, according to your name tag, you've been working for my company for 8 months, Mrs. Williams said, her voice remaining calm despite the obvious disrespect she had endured. "During that time, you've received training about customer service standards, professional behavior, and the importance of treating every delivery recipient with courtesy and respect. Can you explain to me how your behavior today reflects those training principles?" The use of Marcus's name and the reference to his employment duration demonstrated Mrs. Williams' access to employee information and her personal involvement in company operations. Her question about training principles was designed to help him understand that his behavior violated not just basic courtesy, but also specific professional standards that he had agreed to uphold when he accepted employment with QuickShip. Marcus's attempt to respond to Mrs. Williams' question revealed his growing awareness that he had not simply been rude to a customer. He had violated company policies while insulting the person who owned the company and who could terminate his employment immediately. His efforts to explain or justify his behavior only made the situation worse by highlighting the depth of his prejudicial assumptions and his complete failure to understand appropriate professional conduct. "Mrs. Williams, I didn't know. Nobody told me that you were... I was just following procedures for expensive deliveries and trying to make sure..." Marcus's voice trailed off as he realized that none of his explanations could justify the mocking, dismissive, and insulting behavior he had displayed toward someone he had assumed was powerless to challenge his treatment of her. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's incoherent attempts at explanation was informed by her decades of experience in managing employees and her understanding that effective leadership required addressing problems directly while providing opportunities for learning and growth. Her approach emphasized accountability and education rather than simply punishment, reflecting her belief that people could change their behavior when they understood the consequences of their actions. Mr. Thompson, the procedures for expensive deliveries involve verifying identification and obtaining signatures, Mrs. Williams said, her voice carrying the teaching tone she had used in business mentoring relationships throughout her career. They do not include questioning customers' legitimacy, suggesting fraud, mocking their homes or appearance, or treating them with obvious disrespect. Can you help me understand why you believed such behavior was appropriate or professional? The systematic breakdown of Marcus's behavior that Mrs. Williams provided illustrated the difference between legitimate security procedures and discriminatory treatment based on prejudicial assumptions. Her question about appropriateness was designed to help him recognize that his actions had been guided by personal biases rather than professional standards or company policies. The growing crowd of neighbors who had begun to notice the extended interaction on Mrs. Williams' front porch created additional pressure for Marcus as he realized that his professional humiliation was becoming a public spectacle. The presence of witnesses to his discriminatory behavior toward an elderly customer would likely become part of any investigation into his conduct, adding community accountability to the professional consequences he was already facing. Mrs. Williams' awareness of the gathering audience prompted her to consider how this teaching moment could benefit not just Marcus, but also the broader community's understanding of respect, dignity, and the importance of treating all people with courtesy, regardless of their appearance or circumstances. Her decision about how to proceed would determine whether this incident became simply a disciplinary matter or a more comprehensive lesson about assumptions and their consequences. Mr. Thompson, I want you to understand that this situation isn't just about your employment with QuickShip, Mrs. Williams continued, her voice carrying the authority that had guided business decisions affecting thousands of employees and millions of dollars in investments. It's about the values that guide how we treat other people and the assumptions we make about someone's worth or capabilities based on superficial characteristics. The expansion of the conversation beyond employment issues to broader questions of values and assumptions reflected Mrs. Williams' understanding that lasting change required addressing underlying attitudes rather than simply correcting specific behaviors. Her approach to education emphasized personal growth and moral development alongside professional accountability. Marcus's growing understanding of the full scope of his error prompted him to attempt a more comprehensive apology, but his words revealed that he still didn't fully grasp the depth of his prejudicial behavior or the broader implications of the assumptions he had made about Mrs. Williams based on her appearance and living situation. Mrs. Williams, I'm really sorry for how I treated you today, Marcus said, his voice reflecting genuine remorse mixed with fear about his employment future. I guess I made some wrong assumptions about who you were and what you could afford. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. The apology that Marcus offered, while more sincere than his earlier attempts at explanation, still revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of the problem. His focus on wrong assumptions suggested that his error was simply factual rather than moral, and his reference to what she could afford demonstrated that he still viewed the issue primarily in economic terms rather than recognizing the broader questions of dignity and respect that his behavior had violated. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's apology would determine whether this incident became a learning experience that could benefit both him and the broader community, or simply another example of the consequences that followed discriminatory behavior toward people whose stories and accomplishments others failed to recognize or respect. Mrs. Williams's response to Marcus's incomplete apology reflected her understanding that this moment represented more than just an employment issue, It was an opportunity to demonstrate the kind of leadership and grace that could transform hostility into education and create lasting change in how people treated one another. Mr. Thompson, I appreciate that you're sorry, but I want you to understand that this isn't really about wrong assumptions or affordability, she said, her voice carrying the wisdom that came from 7 decades of overcoming challenges and building success through perseverance and dignity. This is about treating every person with respect and courtesy, regardless of how they look, where they live, or what you think you know about their circumstances. The teaching moment that Mrs. Williams created drew on her decades of experience in business leadership, and her understanding that lasting change required addressing underlying attitudes rather than simply correcting surface behaviors. Her approach emphasized moral principles and human dignity, rather than focusing solely on the professional consequences that Marcus was clearly worried about. When I started my first business 45 years ago, I was a young black woman in an industry dominated by men who looked exactly like you, Mrs. Williams continued, her voice taking on the storytelling tone that had captivated audiences in business schools and community organizations for decades. They made the same kinds of assumptions about my capabilities and worthiness that you made about me today. The difference was that I learned from those experiences to treat every person I met with the respect and dignity that I wanted for myself. The personal history that Mrs. Williams shared provided context for Marcus's behavior while illustrating the broader patterns of discrimination that affected people based on their appearance, age, race, and gender. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her own experiences with prejudice created an emotional connection that made her lesson more powerful and memorable than any corporate training program could achieve. Marcus's reaction to Mrs. Williams' story revealed his growing understanding that his behavior was part of a larger pattern of discrimination that had real consequences for real people. His face showed a mixture of shame, embarrassment, and genuine remorse as he began to process the impact of his actions, not just on his employment, but on the dignity and feelings of someone who had achieved far more than he might ever accomplish. Mrs. Williams, I never thought about it that way, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to find words adequate for the magnitude of his error. I guess I made judgments about you that weren't fair or right. I'm really truly sorry for how I treated you, and I understand if you want to fire me. The evolution of Marcus's apology from defensive explanation to genuine recognition of wrongdoing demonstrated the effectiveness of Mrs. Williams' educational approach. His acknowledgement that his judgments weren't fair or right showed movement toward understanding the moral dimension of his behavior, while his acceptance of potential termination indicated that he was beginning to grasp the severity of his actions. Mrs. Williams' decision about Marcus's employment future was informed by her decades of experience in managing people, and her understanding that effective leadership sometimes required giving people opportunities to learn from their mistakes, rather than simply punishing them for errors in judgment. Her response would reflect both accountability and the possibility of redemption for someone who demonstrated genuine willingness to change. Mr. Thompson, firing you would be easy, but it wouldn't necessarily create the kind of learning that prevents this situation from happening again, Mrs. Williams said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had made difficult personnel decisions affecting thousands of employees throughout her career. Instead, I want you to understand that every person you encounter in your work and in your life has a story that you don't know and accomplishments that you can't see. Your job is to treat them with dignity and respect, not to judge their worthiness based on your assumptions. The alternative to termination that Mrs. Williams offered reflected her philosophy that people could grow and change when given appropriate guidance and accountability. Her emphasis on understanding stories and recognizing unseen accomplishments provided Marcus with a framework for approaching future interactions with the respect and humility that should characterize all professional relationships. The comprehensive learning experience that Mrs. Williams created extended beyond Marcus to include the neighbors who had witnessed the interaction and would carry the lessons they had learned to their own communities and relationships. Her handling of discrimination and disrespect demonstrated the power of responding to hostility with education rather than retaliation, creating positive change that rippled outward from a single moment of conflict. 3 months after the delivery incident that had nearly cost him his job, Marcus Thompson was promoted to training coordinator for new QuickShip employees, with responsibility for developing and implementing customer service programs that emphasized respect, dignity, and professional courtesy for all delivery recipients. His personal experience with the consequences of prejudicial assumptions had made him an effective educator for other young employees who might otherwise make similar mistakes. The customer service training program that Marcus helped develop included video testimonials from Mrs. Williams and other business leaders who emphasized the importance of treating every customer with professionalism and respect regardless of their appearance or circumstances. The program became a model for delivery companies throughout the region, demonstrating that effective customer service required understanding the humanity and dignity of every person encountered in professional interactions. Mrs. Williams' decision to invest additional resources in employee training and community education reflected her understanding that the incident with Marcus represented an opportunity to address broader patterns of discrimination and assumption-making that affected many businesses and communities. Her approach to institutional change emphasized prevention through education rather than simply responding to problems after they occurred. The delivery company that had employed Marcus when he mocked Mrs. Williams on her front porch became a case study in transformational leadership and second chances, featured in business schools and management training programs as an example of how effective leaders could turn moments of conflict into opportunities for positive change. The story demonstrated that sustainable business success required more than efficient operations. It demanded a commitment to treating all people with dignity and respect. 6 months after the confrontation that had revealed his prejudicial assumptions and nearly ended his career, Marcus spoke at community events and business conferences about the importance of challenging stereotypes and treating every person with courtesy and professionalism. His transformation from someone who mocked elderly customers to someone who advocated for respect and dignity illustrated the power of effective leadership and the possibility of personal growth when people were willing to learn from their mistakes. Mrs. Williams' response to Marcus's discriminatory behavior became a teaching tool used in diversity training programs and customer service workshops throughout the business community. Her demonstration that grace and education could be more powerful than punishment or retaliation inspired other leaders to approach workplace conflicts and discrimination with patience and wisdom rather than simply implementing disciplinary measures. The modest house on Maple Street, where Marcus had delivered an expensive computer server, became a symbol of the dangers of making assumptions based on appearances and the importance of treating every person with respect, regardless of their living situation or outward displays of wealth. The lesson resonated particularly strongly with service industry workers who learned that their customers' stories and accomplishments were often far more complex and impressive than surface characteristics might suggest. 1 year after the delivery that had changed his life, Marcus Thompson was featured in QuickShip's annual report as an example of the company's commitment to employee development and second chances. His story illustrated that people could overcome prejudicial attitudes and discriminatory behavior when given appropriate guidance, accountability, and opportunities to learn from their mistakes. If this story moved you, don't stop here. Click the next one, subscribe, and share this with someone who still believes in kindness. The transformation of Marcus from a delivery driver who mocked elderly customers to a training coordinator who advocated for respect and dignity demonstrated the lasting impact of Mrs. Williams' decision to choose education over punishment when confronted with discriminatory behavior. Her approach showed that effective leadership required more than simply correcting problems. It demanded a commitment to helping people grow and change in ways that benefited both individuals and the broader community. Mrs. Williams's handling of the incident, that had begun with mockery and ended with profound learning, became a model for addressing discrimination and prejudice in professional settings. Her demonstration that patience, wisdom, and strategic revelation of information could transform hostile encounters into educational opportunities inspired countless other leaders to respond to challenges with grace rather than retaliation. The elderly black woman who had been mocked for ordering expensive technology had used that moment of disrespect to create lasting change in how an entire company approached customer service and employee development. Her response to prejudice had demonstrated that the most powerful way to combat assumptions and stereotypes was not through anger or punishment, but through the kind of dignified teaching that helped people understand the humanity and worth of every person they encountered. The delivery driver, who had soon regretted everything about his behavior toward Mrs. Williams, had learned that respect and courtesy were not just professional requirements, but moral imperatives that reflected the kind of person he wanted to be and the kind of community he wanted to help create. His transformation from mockery to advocacy illustrated that even the most prejudicial attitudes could be changed when people were willing to listen, learn, and grow from their mistakes.